Shifting our focus over to the markets now. This week, we were joined by a new face for Market Journal. That is Kyle Bumsted. He's a market analyst who calls Ericson, Nebraska home. His expertise is in the cattle and the grain markets. We began the conversation with Kyle on Wednesday afternoon by learning more about his background.
Well, I'm Kyle Bumsted. I'm a registered commodity broker, and my family and I farm with my wife's family here west of Ericson, between Ericson and Burwell, north of Ord, and we have a couple kids and raise cows, cow-calf, and feed yard and row crops. So also a commodity office here at the place too.
Well, I'm excited to have you join us this week on Market Journal. Let's attack the grain side of things, and then we'll get to the cattle markets in a second, Kyle. When it comes to the grain markets, give me your general take there. What are you seeing?
So far in the corn market, I guess we'll lead off there. It looks to be pretty friendly. We've got inverted markets here east of July, and the basis keeps firming as we get deeper into harvest. Harvest is really getting wrapped up out there, and the national cash basis is actually firming. So that tells us that the end users, whether it's processors, elevators, feed yards, are really looking for corn. Now, was looking at history a year ago, where our basis was versus this year. We're 20 cents better on a national cash basis index than we were a year ago at this time. So that tells me that our stocks to use is even tighter this year as we're in the middle of harvest or wrapping up harvest than we were a year ago at this time.
Well, here kind of on the topic of corn, I want to get to a viewer question we had this week, Kyle. Had a viewer ask us to see if you would give your thoughts. Is $6 to $7 corn here to stay at least for a while? Your thoughts on that?
I think it is short term. It's here to stay for a while. Corn likes round numbers, and depending on which side of the first of the year you're looking at, I'm sure you probably got some corn stored or looking at that after the first of the year. But it seems like for the D's contract, we're staying between $6.60 and $7. It likes those round numbers. More in tune lately with the $6.80 to $7 mark. But looking out there further, what the market's telling us is December trading a penny and a half over July futures right now. It's an inverted market, and that is structurally friendly long term, meaning our fundamentals are tight, meaning we either have a smaller crop or we've got really good demand. So it does appear that we could stay here north of this $6 mark for quite some time. Now, I would look for that potentially to change here as we move into later first quarter, maybe start of second quarter, as we get a little bit better handle on the livestock side of things.
Kyle, we'll hit on the livestock here in a second, but besides corn in the grain complex, anything when it comes to wheat or soybeans catching your attention there?
Yes, Kansas City wheat is. Kansas City wheat, that market there is probably the most fundamentally bullish right now as we go home here this week. We've got inverted spreads out there. December trading over March by a half cent, March over the July by about 9 cents, and July over September new crop July versus September of next year, penny and 3/4 inverted. So that's telling us that we had a small crop last year, or 2022 was our small crop here. The old crop wheat was small, but then also we've had a big demand pull from the northern plains as merchandisers have come down here looking for higher protein wheat to blend off with on the spring wheat side of things. But getting back to the Kansas City wheat here, we need to keep an eye on that drought monitor. We just keep missing rains here in the western plains. The western Kansas corridor and the Oklahoma panhandle and Texas panhandle just seems to keep missing rain. And we've got a lot of wheat dusted in the ground, and the old adage is plant in the dust, your bins will bust. But that wasn't the case this past year, as we were in dry conditions too when we dusted the wheat crop in here that we took out here in 2022. So the Kansas City wheat market, I think, is going to be sideways here for a little while, because most of the commercials and non-commercials have kind of taken their money off the table for a while here, and I think they'll come back in this spring. But we really need to keep an eye on that moisture map here moving through winter.
Well, let's shift over to the cattle markets now. I look back on 2022, and starting the year, the conversation was all about how the leverage is going to shift from the packers to the cattlemen. At this point, 10 months into the year, do you think we fully absorbed that at this point?
I don't think we've fully absorbed out of it, but we have come a long ways. And when we've come a long ways, the last month or so, we have come a really long ways here as far as the fundamental structure of this live cattle market. And then it took the cash to really get this thing going. But once we saw the spreads turn as well too, and I like watching those forward spreads, because it tells me if they're bidding for cattle up front here, then the front months are going to be leading this complex. Whereas they've been pushing that premium out there in the deferred, saying, we've got plenty of cattle. Let's just kind of hold them back here. We don't need to bid up. But then here about 2 weeks ago, the cash market really came alive, and that's when our spread started to really wake up and start to move too. Now, during the month of September, when we just got out of this cattle and feed report here that we had here last week, the month of September, we saw some of those spreads really start to tighten in. And we'd gone from historically bearish territory, which we're still in bearish territory on these spreads historically, but we are a lot less bearish than we were a month ago on these cattle. Now, case in point here, as we're moving through the month of October, we're getting set to wrap that up, and we've seen some of the spreads that I'll be watching for next summer marketings as far as placements going in here in the month of October. Those have tightened as well too. So that tells me that we could start to see a friendlier cattle on feed situation set up here and kind of shrinking those numbers as we get into the end of the first quarter of next year. We could start to see that happen. However, it's going to depend on how big these cattle come in. We've placed a lot of light cattle, and it's going to depend on too how fast the packer wants to move through them. Here recently, we've moved through a lot of cattle, and we've processed a lot of cattle, and the slaughter numbers have been big, and we've also been able to hold it together on the demand side so far.
All right, something to watch for sure. Kyle, just final thoughts here. Anything else you want to leave us with, whether it be final thoughts or risk management advice in the grain complex or in the livestock side of things?
Sure. We're wrapping up 2022 very rapidly. And we've had all these talks and the Fed's raising interest rates and things like that. So I think now is a good time as we're sitting there, finishing up in the combine or get done working cattle here. Maybe now is the time to sit down and look through things and see what we can plan and kind of control what we can control as far as, moving things around the first of the year and having those discussions with our lenders and things like that about interest and some of those costs that could start to get out of control if we don't watch them.
Kyle, we appreciate your time right here on Market Journal.
You bet. Thank you.